Hello again, everyone. It's time for another palette swatching video. For this video, I'm going to be swatching this palette, which contains all Jackson's brand paint pans. Actually, that's not true. It contains 2 Winsor Newton, but the majority of them are Jackson's brand artist quality pans. So as per usual, I will put a link down below to the video where I go through this traveler's notebook where I'm keeping this swatch book and all of the materials to make and use the swatch book. So I'm going to put this off to the side now. And then I'm also going to put a link to all of the previous videos in this series down below. So you can still see the one from the previous time here, but I'm just going to be doing this one up above. So I'm going to go ahead and open this palette and show you what's in here. So this is the little swatch sheet. I do have a couple of colors. I actually was trying out a few colors that I thought might go in here, but these 2 colors are what I ended up putting in here. And this is Winsor Newton Dioxazine Violet and Winsor Newton Ivory Black. I just didn't have a place for those in other palettes. So I thought the paint itself, the Jackson's paint, which is the majority of this palette, is Jackson's Art Supply's house brand of artist quality paint pans. And I find it to be pretty similar to Winsor Newton in the way that it flows and re-wets on the palette and all that sort of thing. So that's why I thought it would be suitable to put 2 Winsor Newton pans in here with them. So black is not a color I use very often, but I went ahead and put it in here just to have a place for that particular palette or that particular pan. So let's go ahead and get started. If you've seen any of the previous videos, you'll know the setup here. I have pre-labeled all of the colors here. I pre-stamped all of the little swatch areas, and then I also pre-stamped this little mixing palette for color mixing 3 primaries. I put primaries in quotes because I am using things for this particular palette, especially that are not necessarily your typical primary colors. I'm going to get to that once we are finished swatching the individual colors, and I'll show you which colors I've decided to put in there. And I have a little jar of water off to the side, and then also a little napkin to wipe my brush off on. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And before I get to the swatching, I'm also going to show you these pans a little bit closer up. So I believe that these are not pans that are taken out of a tube and then put in here and dried. I believe that these are extruded into little strips and then cut up into these pans, similar to what the Winsor Newton pans are. The Winsor Newton pans are these 2 on the end here, and then all of these are the Jackson brand. You may not be able to see this palette very well while I'm swatching, which is why I figured I would show it to you now. So let's go ahead and start swatching. So I am going to move that there, and I will do my best to remember to move up the book when necessary. Although if I leave it there, you probably can see the whole swatch area. Okay. So the first color here is Cad Yellow Light. And this is a palette from Jackson's that I curated myself. So I chose the colors that are going in here. This was not a pre-made palette with colors. And I really just tried to make a well-balanced palette that would have a warm and a cool of each of the primaries, which if you've watched any of the prior videos, you know that I like the split primary system, and that's what I try to do in most of my palettes, and then supplement from there. And then I have the pans in an old Lucas watercolor tin. I just bought the pans. I did not buy the Jackson's pan, or the Jackson's palette rather. Okay, so that was Cad Yellow Light, and I'm just going to explain this once for this video. But so I put full strength here at the top over the black line to check the opacity. The black line is a line that I have drawn into each of these little spots because it wasn't in the original stamp. So I put it full strength up here, and then I dilute a little bit for the bottom, and then I try to dilute a little bit more for each of these two boxes so that I can see a range of what I can get out of that color. So the next color here is quinacridone gold. And if you've been watching, you probably realize that I really like using quinacridone gold as my warm color, my warm yellow in my palettes, because it's just a really pretty color. And so in this palette, the Cad Yellow Light is what I'm using as my cool yellow, and then Quin Gold is what I'm using as my warm yellow. And then the next color here is Jackson's Red. And this is what I'm using as my warm red. And this is a very intense red. And part of the reason why these remind me of Winsor Newton colors is that this Jackson's Red looks very similar to Winsor Red. And they've also named it for themselves, so the naming convention and the color seem to be similar. And I don't have the pigment numbers written on here, so I don't know what pigment number this particular red is, but it is a very bright red. And now I've put Venetian Red in between. Venetian Red is more of an earth color. Oops, sorry, I was going into the wrong pan there. So this next one is Venetian Red, and this is an earth red. And it is fairly opaque. As far as earth colors go. Okay, and then after that I have put quinacridone purple, which I am using as my cool red here. It's similar to a quinacridone magenta, but a little more purple. And what I hope you're seeing from this is that you really can be quite creative in your color choices in your palette. And you don't have to necessarily pick a specific red or a specific color at all, really. It's really going to be based on how you plan to use it. That was a little too much water there. I'm going to dry off my brush. So what you can do is if you have too much water or too much pigment in an area, what you can do is sop it up with what they call a thirsty brush. So a thirsty brush is just a brush that you wet and then you wipe off most of the water so that water will seep up into the brush when you put it on the paper where the water is. Okay, and the next one is Raw Sienna. That's another earth color. And I didn't wet these colors in advance, but they do seem to wet fairly easily, so that wasn't a concern for me here. And I think that Jackson's brand is pretty good quality for artist quality paints. They are probably, in my opinion, anyway, not as vivid as some other brands. And they don't seem to have as much complexity, like granulation or something like that, that some other brands have. So this is Winsor Newton Dioxazine Violet. You'll see that this is very vibrant, a very vibrant violet. And this is just what I would consider an extra color in this palette. Extra meaning something that I wouldn't necessarily view as just the basic palette of mixing colors. But you can, of course, mix purple with other colors. All right, so the next one is Permanent Sap Green. We're going back to Jackson's brand here. Okay, yeah, you can see that. And I found this particular color to be a little opaque for a sap green. It's kind of interesting. Most companies have a different formulation for sap green. I don't think that there's really any particular brand that's going to be the same as another for sap green. But I would definitely say that this is not necessarily your typical sap green. Okay, and the next color here is Ultramarine Deep. Now, truthfully, the only thing that I can figure with putting deep at the end of ultramarine is that it tends to be a deeper tone of ultramarine, but I think that it's still PB29, and I don't really know how they make it deep as opposed to regular ultramarine. I know with French ultramarine and regular ultramarine, the French ultramarine has a bigger pigment particle than the regular ultramarine. But I'm not sure that the same is true here for ultramarine deep. And not all brands have an ultramarine deep. Okay, so ultramarine deep is what I'm using as my warm blue in this palette. And then the next color is my cool blue, which is Prussian blue. And this is a pretty deep Prussian blue. And if you'll remember, warm and cool, it just means that they look a little cooler and lean towards the cooler color on the color wheel. So, and I actually, before I go on, let me finish doing the Prussian blue here, and then I'll show you. I have a color wheel here handy. Okay. So this is just a little pocket color wheel that I have at my desk. So you'll notice, so let's see, let's have the yellow up at the top here. So there's yellow, red, and blue, which are the three primaries. But so a warm blue would be closer to violet on this wheel, and a cool blue would be closer to green as the cooler color. A cool yellow would be closer to green. A warm yellow would be closer to orange and red. And then for red, it's a little weird. So for cool red, you'd be going towards blue, and then for a warm red, you'd be going towards orange. Or yellow and or orange. So you're really just going towards one end or the other of the color wheel here. And that's what makes it cool or warm. And cool and warm is kind of subjective as well. Some people will see color differently than other people. Actually, everyone probably sees color differently from each other, at least a little bit. Okay, so let's get back to our swatching here. So indigo is the next color. And I really like indigo as a darkening color on my palette. And this is a very nice indigo, actually. Not too strong, but very pretty. And I probably would use it in place of a black, but although I've now added a black to this palette. But generally, blacks tend to make colors look a little bit more dull than if you mix it with another color or if you mix your own black. Okay, the next color here, It says it's Payne's Gray, but I think those got flipped on the palette. Let me see. So that's black. Oh, you know what, I think that was Payne's Gray that I just put on there, and this other one, I think I skipped over the indigo. Sometimes Payne's Gray and indigo are very similar in tone, so it can be hard. Yes, this is indigo, and I should have known. Indigo, that's pretty indigo. But some indigos, like Daniel Smith's indigo, is closer to this than to this, I would say. Okay, so what I will switch those around on the palette, on the where I've named them here. And I don't think I showed you how I did that previously, so I will do that at the end here. That's why I was all thrown off. Okay, so here the next color is Burnt Umber. And Burnt Umber tends to be, on this palette anyway, a little bit harder to re-wet. Let me get more. Okay, and then the last color here is Ivory Black. And that's the last Winsor Newton color. There's only two here. And Ivory Black is a pretty true black here. What I probably will end up using this for is to dilute it out and get a little bit of a gray. I probably won't use it just straight as a black. Okay, before I get on to the mixing, a little mixing area over there, I am going to try and find my correction tape. Here we go. I usually keep it in my drawer, but I didn't want to set expectations just in case it was not in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the indigo and the Payne's Gray. So I am just going to put the correction tape over these names. Okay. And then I'm going to take my multi-pen from my Traveler's Notebook here, put it to the blue gel pen, and then this one is Payne's Gray. And whenever it is a European brand, they always spell the gray with an E, so I tend to stay consistent with that and spell it with an E. If it were an American brand, I would spell it with an A. And then this one is indigo. And it's not too noticeable there. And I'm not sure whether I will actually switch them in the palette, because this is just a reference to me for what's in the palette so that I know which palette I'm going to be using. That's essentially why I'm creating this, these charts. So I probably will just leave it like that. I could also do a little arrow, you know, a little two-sided arrow and have shown the change that way, but this will be less confusing to me. So, okay, so let's go on to the mixing. Well, it's good we figured that out because I am going to be using indigo as my blue here. I decided to use indigo as my blue, Venetian red as my red, and then raw sienna as my yellow. So these are all not really your typical primary colors. So let's see what we get. I'm going to open up, I'm going to put this mixing area here, took a little swatch off of that so that I can utilize this area here. So let's start with the red since that's what's at the top. So indigo, Venetian red. So Venetian red. Make sure I find that correct. Red. And part of the reason why I had a problem, if you can't see, is because I don't have the Winsor Newton colors on the front here, because I added those after I had originally made this palette and just used this, and then I didn't redo it. So I keep counting back from the end, and there's actually one more on the end. So that's why I get a little confused with this palette. So let's see. We actually want to be there. Okay. Should measure over from the other side. Okay. So this is Venetian red. And it'll be interesting to see because this is a fairly opaque color. And I probably mentioned before that when you have an opaque color, it tends to sometimes overtake the transparent color. Okay, so I'm just putting a little bit of that color there, rinsing out my brush. And then I'm going to put in the yellow, which is raw sienna in this case. Okay, and then I'm going to add a little bit, I'm going to add what I think is about the same amount to this mix here. I need to add a little bit more. Because we don't want it to be overwhelmed by the Venetian red. And it's still definitely skewing Venetian red because raw sienna is a bit of a more subtle color to begin with. So, but still, you can tell it's kind of in between these colors. This one is probably not going to have much difference between these two. So what I'm going to do, I think too, my raw sienna is not that wet. So I'm going to add raw sienna to half of this mix here, or roughly half of this mix, to get this in-between color. So you can definitely see the opaque color is kind of taking over here. And then I'm going to add a little bit more Venetian red here to get this color. And that got a little watered out. Okay. And I'm going to wipe that out of my palette because I don't think I need that mix anymore. And then I'm going to go over to the blue. So the blue I'm using is indigo. So make sure that so that's 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 here. Okay. Okay, and I'm going to mix the indigo and the raw sienna first. So I'm going to put the indigo in the pan. And this is a very bright indigo. I would suspect that it probably has phthalo blue in it as one of its colors. Okay, so then I'm going to mix an equal amount of yellow, which is this raw sienna. Now that the sienna is a little bit more wet, you can see it definitely created a green. Okay, I'm going to rinse off my brush, and then in half of this here, I'm going to mix more raw sienna. And then in the other half, I'm going to mix more indigo. And that's a really beautiful color. It's almost like a turquoise. Okay. And then I'm going to wipe that out as well. We need to wet my napkin a little bit. Okay. And now we are going to do the indigo and the red. So there's the indigo. And let's make sure I have the right red here. Okay. Oh, that's very interesting. So that did not make a purple. That made more of a gray. And I'm going to mix a little bit more of that red with half of this here. Yeah, I don't think we're ever going to get to purple. That's maybe a little bit more purple. I don't know. I think it's because this has some green in it. Like I was saying, if it's a phthalo blue, that is a green-leaning blue. Okay, and then on this last one, I'm going to put a little bit more of the indigo. That's very interesting. Okay, so this is why you use some very interesting primaries to see what colors you can get out of it, because here you're definitely getting an orangish color with the what we're using as a red and the yellow, but here we're not getting a purple when we're mixing the blue and the Venetian red. Instead, we are getting essentially a gray, mixing those two. Okay, so I have this puddle here. I'm going to mix the raw sienna in there, because that's going to be all three mixed together, and then we're going to try and get a neutral, which shouldn't be too hard with all of these colors. So that looks fairly green, and because green is on the opposite side of the color wheel from red, I'm going to add more of the Venetian red to get back to a neutral. Yeah, and I think that's probably pretty good. So that's our neutral for this palette. And again, you can get so many different colors than what this is representing here. You can mix in different ratios and different quantities. You're going to get a wider variety than that. Okay, so I just thought that'd be fun to see a different primary, see what comes out of that, and that was definitely some interesting mixing there. All right, I'll put that napkin aside, put my brush aside. And so for next time, let's see what we have coming up. Oh, okay, so this is a palette that the next in the series. Let me go out there. This next one in the series is a palette that I put in a Mead-in tin from Amazon. The Mead-in tin just looks very similar to this. And I put just a whole bunch of different brands together. And this has evolved over time. I used to have it as sort of my catch-all for my artist quality watercolors that I wasn't using elsewhere back when I had a smaller collection, and now I've actually changed some things in here, and it's still kind of the overflow palette, but it has a lot of really interesting colors and can create some really interesting mixes. Since I set this up, I did change some of the colors in here, so I had to go through and correct, and I actually ended up taking two of these little swatch panels out because I put in full pans for two colors, so that eliminated two half pans out of the set. So just something to look forward to for next time. But that's going to be it for today. Feel free to like and or subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Have a great day.